Hello everyone, and welcome to the cognitiveSEO Talks show. Today we have Mr. Gerry White, who's been in the SEO industry for about 20 years. So he's a technical marketing consultant that has worked on sites such as BBC, McDonald's, Gordon Ramsay, Premier Inn, or DirectGo. Gerry has been creating, promoting, and analyzing websites, and more recently, apps for companies across the world. He's also a speaker on international conferences specialized in SEO, and at the moment, he's working at Just Eat. Gerry, welcome to the show, and please say a few words about yourself to the audience.
I don't know what else to add to that. That was a great introduction. So yeah, I've been working on and off for 20 years. I say most recently, I've been working with Just Eat, leading sort of global technical SEO globally. This mainly involves things like migrations, consolidations, and as you mentioned, working on sort of some of the apps promotion as well. So yeah.
Okay. How do you? I suppose at Just Eat, what are your most the things that you struggle most with in terms of scaling SEO? What's your challenge there?
So the biggest problem from a scale point of view is the fact that the Just Eat website has been around for 12 years. It's got lots of legacy, different differentiation. And so often it's basically trying to get a lot of things changed quite quickly, but at the same time, the scale of the operation, the global nature, and the sort of single code base means that to do something, we have to kind of go quite slowly to kind of go quite fast. Just Eat's really good in that they do releases, 5, 10, 20 times a week. So it is a fast-moving company, but at the same time, we have to kind of make sure that everything is tested very effectively across. So it isn't quite as easy as sort of like a smaller shop where I kind of turn around and say, hey, we'll fix this, and then it's a relatively easy thing to fix. I have to be very mindful of the fact that we're deploying to millions of people, so anything I break will cost the company a lot of money, and then I'll get in trouble.
Okay. Do you plan and do A/B tests when we're talking about SEO?
Not so much with SEO. We are planning on doing more A/B tests with SEO, but that's mainly because at the moment, a lot of the platforms that we've got for testing are for user-based testing, which means that it splits users, not so much with like the pages and things like that. We do a lot of tests, but it's not so much A/B tests. We kind of do a deployment maybe in a country that's less popular than the bigger ones and kind of go, did this work? What was the impact? Can we roll back on it? And for instance, just recently, we're kind of looking at a new menu design, and we're looking at whether or not the implications of it, sort of moving from 3 or 4 different pages to 1 or 2 different pages, what would be the impact, and similar bits and pieces like that. So we do test a lot, but it's not necessarily in the same way that we would test, for instance, A/B test at the moment. That is a capability we're looking at improving there. Okay.
Since the site is very, very big, what's your advice on page architecture when it comes to large sites? What's your point of view about this?
So the one thing to remember is that everything has got to be super simple. The bigger the site, the more complicated things become. Now, the one thing you've got to do is make sure your basics are right. And it's surprising how often, on the larger sites, when you start looking at things, the basics are often missing. This is everything from simple open graph, schema.org, title tags and things like that. And it's very easy for you to find that something drops off somewhere and it isn't noticed down the line, especially as things are being redesigned, redeployed. The other thing is to remember is that the larger the site, the more things like crawl budget is absolutely critical. One of the recent deployments that we were looking at would have gone from about like 100,000 pages to 7 billion pages because of creating a number of crawl traps. So it's kind of critical that you look at those little changes and the actual impacts before you deploy them, especially nowadays with things like JavaScript and things becoming more processed by search engines. And so you can kind of create things in JavaScript that you wouldn't necessarily notice if you're just using kind of a standard crawler that wasn't executing JavaScript.
Did you saw I don't know, a drop in rankings when you're talking about JavaScript on particular areas of the site, maybe, and you're focusing more on the classical way of doing it? Or
so we've been very careful all the way through. The team is brilliant. They do things like server-side rendering. We make sure that everything's done almost as perfectly as possible, but there are occasions where pages will create artificial URLs or something, and you'll discover things like Angular issues, which you wouldn't necessarily get if you were kind of just creating straight HTML. So sometimes we look in places like 404 reports, sometimes we look in Google's own kind of information that brings it back, and I go, what is Google finding that it shouldn't be finding? We do some log file analysis, but we're limited in that. And one of the things, the bigger the site, the more traffic you get, the harder it is to actually get raw logs, especially as they're often split over multiple different kind of boxes. So we're kind of consolidating logs to try and find out where the crawl issues are. But these sort of things aren't as easy. We haven't seen any drop in rankings, but as I say, that's mainly because I've been kind of as perfectionist as possible, and nothing's really gone out where I kind of go, actually, Google won't be able to crawl that.
Okay. Have you applied any of the things that the SEO industry is saying and you didn't see improvements, like, I don't know, a myth of the SEO industry that didn't actually work in your case?
So far, most of the stuff that we've been doing has still been relatively simple. And it is interesting, though, that country by country, the impact of different things like schema, for instance, we were monitoring click-through rates as we released different versions of schema and what the impact would be. And it would actually vary from country to country as to how much of an impact it would have. So, different countries have a different approach to takeaways, delivery, and things. So it's a cultural thing. I mean, we often talk about internationalization as being a technical exercise, but a lot of it is cultural. Different countries have different approaches. So different approach to almost interaction with the search results page.
Okay. I suppose you're using Google Search Console with the site. Is it something that is not working well for such a large site from Google Search Console perspective?
The good thing about Just Eat is the fact that we do have local websites for each country from that point of view. So we don't have one sort of single master Google Search Console view of everything. We have site by site. The downside to that, of course, it means there's a lot of different monitoring and you can't consolidate it back up. There is no API for a lot of aspects of Google Search Console. You can get the data out, but sort of like some of the key issues, you can't kind of get them out in the same way. And that's kind of frustrating when you want to be able to look at things like the inspect URL, why things aren't working quite right. You can do things like get out some basic data levels, but honestly, the work involved in automating all that hasn't been worth it in terms of the payoff, so we haven't kind of gone down that route. But yeah, Google Search Console's got a crazy amount of information in there. I do spend a lot of time when I'm kind of releasing new features, releasing new technology, kind of going, okay, how's Google seen this? What's the problem? Has it kind of created additional problems? And how's it perceiving the page? Especially as we're using JavaScript to kind of enrich the user experience so much. And so Google will kind of look at it once and just kind of have one version of the page, and then it'll come back again, 2 to 3 weeks later and have a different version of the page. We've got to make sure that there isn't any issues when it comes back for that second pass as well as the first pass.
Okay. What's your strategy when you're talking about increasing the rankings on a quarter by quarter, let's say? You have X amount of traffic now, you want to more. What's the strategy?
That's a hard one. Every year or every couple of quarters, we're looking at different ways in which people are sort of navigating, using our site. And so every quarter, it's almost a case-by-case basis. So for instance, we're looking at things like whether or not we need more internal linking, whether or not we need to improve a kind of user experience. Do we need to look at restaurant pages that cover multiple terms, so on and so forth. So a lot of it, unfortunately, it's down to good old-fashioned techniques like keyword research. Keyword research is one of those things every SEO person hates to do so much of, but it's just such a critical part of the job. It's kind of quite depressing when I spend my time kind of looking through pages and pages of Excel. More recently, I've been using Data Studio to kind of analyze and look at data much more smartly, but still, it's Excel kind of is the forefront of my job.
What metrics do you use when you're doing keyword research in order to identify the opportunities?
Well, there's 3 things that we do. One of them is looking at whether or not the traffic would be relevant to the site. So it's relevancy. The second part is kind of good old-fashioned keyword volume. Now, the one thing is about any site that kind of has the same kind of content as Just Eat or a lot of the sites that I've worked on, often the long tail is the critical part. It's great to kind of rank for that one key head term, but actually if you don't rank for the long tail, that one key head term will give you 1% of your total traffic level, but nowhere near as much of the potential as the rest of the 99% of the long tail. So it's kind of like understanding how we kind of match the long tail with the head kind of terms. The other side of it is that whether or not we should be ranking for that term. So one example I use often is nasi goreng, which is a dish from Indonesia. There's kind of huge search volumes around it, but if we were to kind of market on that term, we might find people looking for nasi goreng, but would they be looking for cooking instructions? And in which case Google always presents recipe information. And if we're not presenting recipe information, we probably won't be able to kind of rank for that key term. So that's one of the reasons that, you know, we have to kind of be mindful as to whether or not we can definitely rank for that term and how we kind of go about doing it. If we give out recipe information, it'd be great, but it's not really what Just Eat's about. We're about getting you the food to you rather than getting it cooked for you.
Okay. I know you're a fan of Google Tag Manager. I suppose you're also using it there. What are the goods and the bads of Google Tag Manager from an SEO perspective?
So I'm not really allowed to hack around with Google Tag Manager here. So I do it a lot myself, and I have done it a lot in the past. Now, the great thing about Google Tag Manager is you can kind of go, actually, I need to fix something on this one page. It's unique, so it isn't covered by the templates. I want to say, when Google comes or when a user comes, I want to fix this one element on this page. And you can do that with JavaScript quite strongly. The downside to doing things like that in a big company is every single hack you put in needs to be monitored, maintained, and in a large company with a release process and kind of like control over the code, somebody being able to willy-nilly sort of inject JavaScript somewhere is quite dangerous. I love the fact that we can use it to kind of do quick tests, so we can do kind of effective A/B tests, and we can do all sorts of other tests, but Google's pretty terrible at executing JavaScript. The more I kind of investigate it, the more I realize that actually it's slow and it's not as effective. So I've had to be very careful with kind of doing anything with Google Tag Manager on the site. The other exciting technology that I've seen recently is Edge SEO, which is where you can actually modify pages at almost a CDN type level. And this is very new, very exciting, and I'd love to be able to do it, but again, can't do it with my main client, you know, so I am looking at other clients where I'm able to do this with, so that's good fun.
Okay. In terms of ranking signals, what do you think works in 2019? Content, links, social, I don't know, traffic. What's your opinion on this?
I think the key one is the same thing as been for a long time. It's like the relevancy. If Google kind of figures out you're most relevant for it, then you will always rank for it. Google tries to interpret every query. So if you type in like takeaways near me, Google's not going to turn around and look for a page that's optimized for the key phrase takeaways near me. You know, first of all, it'll be takeaways near you that it's almost optimized for, and secondly, it's going to try and find actual local takeaways near to you. We've often kind of experienced that Google is almost interpreting everything nowadays. So, you know, the classic example is if you type in what time is it in Canada, which I do quite a lot because I work with a Canadian team, you know, Google's not going to give me a page of results. It's going to give me that time in Canada, and that's it. So I'm never going to interact with the SERPs other than look at the time. And Google's kind of increasingly saying, you know, what is the most relevant for this term? So in terms of ranking signals, you've got to get the right basics down to say, am I completely relevant for this term? Internal linking is always critical, but ultimately you've got to kind of understand around what the user is searching for. And Google's getting really good at this.
So intent is one of the key factors. Yeah.
Ultimately very keen on product schema and things like that. So the most relevant schema on the page, the more relevant the search results will look, the higher the click-through rate. And I do believe that the click-through rate is actually a ranking signal, despite what Google says. I'm very convinced of this. Google's got all this data. Google's got it in Google Search Console. It's got it in all these other places. It's got the machine learning capabilities. It's got the intelligence. It's going to use this data to kind of just basically rank pages better. But Google says they're not doing it.
Yeah, obviously. Traffic, what do you think about traffic? Does traffic impact rankings in your opinion?
I think brand searches definitely do. So what I mean by that is if people search for your brand, then Google's seeing this as a perception of you being a brand. So it's kind of understanding the signals rather than necessarily traffic. I think traffic alone is potentially not necessarily a direct one. except maybe interaction with SERPs. So if everybody's searching for what's the one, Lenny Henry Hotel, and everybody goes to a particular hotel, then that will actually be a sort of ranking factor for that hotel. I'm trying to think of another good example, but basically, yeah, traffic alone, I don't think is necessarily it, but traffic plus signals, I think, was kind of a good indication.
What do you think about link building? Link building, there is the old school link building and the new school, let's say, link building. What's your approach to this?
I'm very much of the new age in that if you have the right links from the right places, it works really well. Now, the definition of the right links from the right places generally means that you've got to get coverage through good old-fashioned PR techniques rather than sort of the link building techniques. But there are other techniques you can use. I mean, everybody's kind of against directory links at the moment, but actually directory links are relevant if the directory is relevant to your industry or niche or something like that. I mean, the best example is local. I've done some work with friends where I've kind of got sort of small local websites to link through to them, relevancy on topic, and actually it's definitely improved their rankings as a result of that. So I think that if you've got the right relevant link, it's going to be highly relevant to your business. So I mean, another good example is if you've got something relevant to local councils, councils are actually really good at linking out. And this isn't PR-based link building, this is almost old-fashioned link building, but still, you wouldn't necessarily think actually councils as a great source of link. But if you've got something relevant to an authoritative website, it will definitely link to you, and those links are definitely valuable. Google's still using the link architecture as a key ranking signal, but it is better able to kind of go, actually, this is a dodgy link from a dodgy website now. And I think the age of the bloggers is kind of dying a little bit. They're getting a bit too spammy, a little bit too greedy for big companies like, well, any big company to basically rely on that as a good source of high quality links.
Okay, I saw some group on Facebook, people were talking about the influence of anchor text on rankings, and some were saying that there is no influence. What's your take on this?
Yeah, the anchor text definitely still is relevant, but Google are probably using this as a spam signal as much as it's being used as anything else. So it's the anchor text, it's the words around the anchor text, the paragraph around it, and all the rest of it. So, you know, if you've got a paragraph talking about London tours and it links through to your website on London tours, and it's not spammy and it's relevant, then, you know, you'll start to rank for that key term. If you get like 1,000 links that say exactly your money term, like London tours, Google's going to turn around and kind of go, actually, this is clearly manipulated, and you'll just discount them all fairly quickly. It can even actually downgrade you completely for that key term. I've seen many occasions where a website has actually lost rankings for a key term, and you look at the backlink profile and kind of go, yeah, I can kind of see why you've got so many key terms coming in on that one phrase, and it's just going to lose your rankings for it. So yeah.
Okay.
But not spammy.
What about the content on the page? What's your opinion on copywriting and how you produce the copy for that particular page that you want to rank well on for a particular topic and keyword?
The one thing I would say is that you don't have to have the minimum of keywords always. I say that, but I'm about to contradict myself. You do have to have enough keywords to show intent and relevance. But I've seen so many SEO landing pages where it's piles and piles of words on a product category page, and it's not ranking particularly well, whereas another page which actually has just, you know, the bare minimum content and is clearly relevant outranks it every time. And it's just because Google nowadays is kind of going relevance over all of the other kind of like ranking techniques almost. So I'm not saying don't have the keyword on the page. What I'm saying is that you need to have it, you need to have the keyword, maybe a sort of a short, like 150 words kind of text, and not sort of, you know, blocks and reams of text, because that's just not going to work anymore.
Okay, what's your opinion on when we're talking about the on-page structure? And here I refer to SEO is getting more and more complicated and complex and in-depth. And surely there are things that are critical, very important, and things that are less critical and less important. Yeah. Which of the things in SEO would you not address on a site, or you would put a lower priority on the medium priority?
So it's surprising how many websites out there have got robots index follow. There's no point in having that on the page. That's the Google's default action. The one thing I would say is that keywords are totally irrelevant to search engines nowadays, almost all of them. The one thing that they are sometimes relevant for is internal site search. So don't delete your keywords until you've checked that your internal site search doesn't use them. On top of that, the title tag is absolutely critical. I've done so many little tests where I found that, you know, improving the title tag will have a significant impact. And it's kind of depressing in some ways, because that's the most boring job any SEO person ever has to do, is like thousands and thousands of title tags. But, you know, combined with keyword research, combined with a bit of understanding, you can make quite a significant difference. Description tags. Description tags are there really to improve click-through rate, which could be a ranking factor on the basis that we were discussing this earlier on, that, you know, if you get a higher click-through rate, you get better rankings. But the description tag itself has no direct impact on rankings. The one thing that I would say is absolutely critical, which is often overlooked, is the canonical tag. And the reason I say this is the amount of websites out there that have got terrible on-page similar content, and you know, if they don't get the canonical tag right, it just doesn't consolidate, it doesn't kind of improve the rankings. And you have to be careful with this. Should you include things like sort orders or filters and things like that, there are times when actually there's high search volume for particular filters and facets, and you've actually used your canonical tag to filter that out, and vice versa. So it is important that you kind of understand what people are searching for and whether or not it should be filtered or out when defining your canonical tags. The H1 tag, I still make sure that's highly relevant. It's debatable how relevant that is to Google, but I just consider it important, if only for accessibility. And also making sure that things like the privacy statement, the cookie statement, isn't included in the H1. So again, it's surprising how many pages, if you look at them and analyze them, the H1 actually is the cookie statement saying, please accept our cookies. And that's just a kind of like bad signal to Google.
Okay, and what about sitemaps? Do you think sitemaps are still relevant? Here, there are two situations from my perspective: small sites and very large sites with millions of pages to be indexed.
To be honest, I always make sure that I've got an XML sitemap. To be honest, it's normally a very easy, quick win. Almost every single CMS out there can produce a sitemap relatively simply. If not, you can produce a static sitemap with the relevant key pages. You don't have to have every page in there. And you can have multiple sitemaps. So for instance, you can kind of go, actually, I just want to have this subset of pages and the rest of them are linked to from these pages. So I make sure that Google finds those pages and take it from there. The bigger the site, the more complicated it is. And I do find that a lot of XML sitemaps out there are terrible. They've all got the same last modified date. They've got the same priority, frequency, and that they're just useless parameters if they're not managed correctly. But one opportunity that people aren't taking advantage of with sitemaps is images. Because of the fact that on a mobile device, nowadays images are so much more prominent. Every time you do a search on a mobile, you'll see lists and lists of product images. Putting an image sitemap together is actually a quick win. You can basically either produce it from your CMS or produce a static one with your key content pages. And then when you do a search for a product or a particular page on your site, you'll find much more relevant critical images. So that's a really good win. Okay,
so this means you are also focusing your traffic coming from Google Images.
Not just Google Images, but Google Mobile. If you do a search on a Google mobile device now, sorry, not Google Mobile, but on Google on a mobile device, you'll find that a lot of the search results have now got images. So it's not just from Google Images, it's everywhere.
Okay. Do you have a hack that you would like to share or can share with the audience in terms of SEO, something that it's not mainstream and everyone uses, a technique, a strategy, an idea?
So one of the things that I'm using a lot of at the moment is Google Data Studio. And the reason I'm using Google Data Studio is to kind of get more information from Webmaster Tools than ever before. And this allows you to kind of create a very simple connector that allows you to pull out the keywords, the pages, you can combine it with other data sources, you can filter it for brand, non-brand, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. So quite quickly, it's a way of exporting huge amounts of data from your Google Search Console so you can analyze it in another tool. The other thing I like to do is use kind of Data Studio to kind of analyze where JavaScript and mobile devices are converting. So creating kind of a pivot table almost of what devices and conversion rates to kind of go where the holes are. So that's my two things at the moment I'm doing a lot.
Okay, thank you. And how different, because you worked with both large brands and smaller companies, how different is SEO when applied to a large enterprise versus a small company?
Well, honestly, it's not hugely different a lot of the time. A lot of the time, it's almost just a different process. For instance, getting something done in a large company is often more political than a small company, where often I sit with a developer and kind of go, hey, can I get this done? In a large company, often I'm sat with a team of developers and going, hey, can I get this done? And it's just them kind of going, actually, I need to get it prioritized by somebody. I need to basically persuade somebody there's a case for it. Sometimes even relatively small things I need to build a business case for. Sometimes relatively large things, I can just get them done because it's part of another release. So it's almost just kind of making sure that everything's safer. The other thing is if I break a small company, there's a good chance that a day later nobody's noticed and I can fix it again quickly. I mean, I never do that. But in a large company, if I break it, then yeah, I can get into trouble.
Okay. How do you see the future of search? You've been in search for quite some time. You've seen how it evolved. How do you think it will evolve from now on?
But the big focus that everyone seems to be talking about is voice at the moment, but that's not the future almost. The future is going to be in entities. Google is increasingly saying, I don't want to give you 10 blue links. What I want to give you is relevant results. We've seen it coming in jobs, we've seen it coming in travel, hotels, all sorts of other things. You can now get an Uber, for instance. If you go into Google Maps, you can find out where the nearest Uber is. This is how Google's kind of seeing its own future almost, and we've got to kind of work within that, or alternatively work around it. So Amazon's done a great job of basically being the alternative product search engine. But for everybody else, what we've got to do is figure out how to be the right entity in the right place for Google to kind of pull in the data. That doesn't mean that I'm kind of against voice. It means that voice will very much be around entities and things like that. So as you do a voice search, Google's going to use the entity relationships and all the information there to kind of deliver the experience. So that's why I think entity stuff is the future. The other thing is mobile is increasingly giving more and more signals to Google. So we know Google knows where you've been, where you're going, what you're doing. It looks at the last photographs you've done. It's got huge amounts of data. So the level of personalization that Google's going to be doing on a mobile device is going to be so high. It's just going to be terrifying. The 10 blue links of yesterday, the ranking reports that we see are going to be very different in the future.
Okay, and one last question: if you would be able to change something at the Google search engine mainly, what would you change?
But, I'd like them to be able to give business owners more control over the search results. By that I mean, for instance, if there's a phone number there, for instance, if I want to change the phone number, you can't do it. If there's a broken link somewhere on the knowledge panel, it's actually quite challenging to get Google to fix it. If it's the wrong image, it can be months of emailing them to kind of try and get an image fixed. There's so many problems with the search results, and actually, I think that search SEO people should actually have a little bit more control over those results, which are relevant to a business. We've lost the ability to control the insight links. We've lost the ability to kind of do certain other bits like that. So I think that's the one thing that I'd actually get Google to fix up. I also kind of miss the 10 blue links days in some ways. I actually find Google's almost trying to anticipate what I'm searching for. It's probably really good for most people, but sometimes I kind of want to put a load of keywords in and get the relevant pages to those keywords, and I miss those days.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerry, for this interview. I'm sure the audience will love it. All the best to you and to our audience, and see you next time in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.